This series is sponsored by the Old School Football Shop.
Old School Football is a UK-based retro football company honouring the rich history of football past by creating high-quality embroidered vintage team crests on t-shirts, polos, hoodies and scarves. Minimalist badges from the 1800s right up to the 1990s.
On the website oldschoolfootball.co.uk, you can find English League and non-league, Scottish football, international teams and even rugby. And what's more, until the end of the lockdown podcast, listeners can get 10% off their whole catalogue plus free UK delivery. Just use the code HONEST10 at checkout for 10% off.
You can follow them on Twitter at OSF Shop, Instagram at Old School Football Shop, TikTok at Old School Football, Facebook at Old School Football Shop, and don't forget, just use HONEST10 at the checkout for 10% off.
Hello and welcome to Coaching Diaries, a new series from the Honest Football Podcast. I'm Charlie Betts and I'm a part-time football coach and a PE teacher. As a teacher, I've always been fascinated by the way coaching works in different sports and the impact that can have on me as a football coach. Over the next few weeks, we're going to meet different expert coaches from different parts of the sporting world. We're really going to drill down into their philosophies, values and techniques of their field and find out what makes them so great at their discipline and how it can improve both you and me as coaches and as people. If you like what you hear, then don't forget to like, share and subscribe and comment below on anything that you've drawn from this series that you might want to share with others. Next up is hockey expert Stephen Williams. Stephen is a professional coach who works in a variety of settings from youth to men's and women's, including county and national level. Stephen is very honest about his coaching journey, which included owning a pub for a while, and it is clear from this interview why he's so good at what he does. Stephen really challenged me on my outlook on the importance of working on those fundamental skills that underpin every single session. You can follow Stephen on Twitter at Stephen MANANI, and as always you can find all of our content at Honest Football 3. Introducing Coaching Diaries with hockey expert Stephen Williams. And it's with great pleasure I can introduce Stephen to us now. So, Stephen, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Really appreciate you giving up your time. And what should have been quite a busy day for you with webinars and training and stuff like that, hasn't it? So, thanks for being here.
Oh well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Basically, Stephen, obviously you're sort of taking part in our coaching series. So, before we get on to you as the sort of coach, just give us maybe a bit of a brief background in your sort of how you got into your sport of hockey and, you know, maybe that transition from that to then coaching, really. So your sort of journey in hockey, if that makes sense. Where did it all begin?
Okay, so my journey really started when I was in year 5, so junior school, and I wasn't the most popular of people. I was almost on my own to a point in my school and had almost to a point of bullying. I wouldn't class it as bullying, but almost to that point. Anyway, long story short, a hockey coach came in one day and gave us a hockey stick and didn't really tell us too many of the rules. And this one lad that annoyed me earlier in the day picked up the hockey ball and I whacked him on the leg. And he was rolling on the floor and he was crying his eyes out. And I was like, oh, I quite like this. And the coach came over and he said, you're not allowed to do that, and then explained it all to me. But ever since then, I really just quite enjoyed it. And I'm not a person that really enjoys hurting people at all. I've never done it since. But it's that was really how I really first got hooked. Now, if you read between the lines there, actually, that was a coach who has gone into a primary school and introduced a sport to a group of players that have never come across it before. So really, I guess that's how I got into it. And then my journey is really hockey has changed so much over the last 20 odd years that I've been in the sport, and there wasn't really any junior sections as such around me at the time. I'm from rugby originally, and there were 2 clubs in rugby, and there wasn't any junior training. It was just the stuff that this one guy was doing. So there wasn't really a place that I could go to develop. So I was playing hockey once a week, but that was just as part of a game in the men's game. So in hockey, we can go into men's hockey at 13.
Oh wow, wow! I didn't know
So
that. Yeah, that's the first I've heard of that. Wow, that's incredible.
yeah, so we just weekly games for me, and
Mm.
this was all alongside playing football. So I was a pretty decent footballer, like to think I was a half decent footballer when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And it was when I got to university, I had to pick out of the two. So when I was at
Right.
college, I played football on a Wednesday and then hockey on a Saturday. And then university, I just had to pick the two. In terms of, I was probably a better footballer than I was a hockey player, but I enjoyed hockey more, so ended up going that route.
Just to interrupt really quickly, Stephen. In terms of where you were saying about the football and the hockey, did you play in a similar position for both teams, or were you a defender for one and a striker for the other, etc.? Or so where were you on both pitches, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I love to attack. Whether I was hockey or football, it was attack, and typically on one of the wider wing positions. So used to be, definitely used to be. I used to be quite quick, or think I was quite quick. So I had a bit of a habit of getting around somebody and really going and gaining space. So whether that was hockey or football, I guess for me it was. The two sports were quite similar. One, you just had a stick. The other one, you didn't. So,
yeah. So you obviously got to that sort of stage. So you chose hockey as the sport to sort of pursue, really, from there. So, fast forwarding a little bit, you're now the head coach of a whole number of different teams, and you're sort of a professional hockey coach as just, so I don't know why I said that, so I'll edit that bit out. So obviously now a professional hockey coach, Stephen, you're head coach for a number of teams. So how did that go from, maybe just choosing at university to essentially doing this as your job every day, really?
So when I was 16, I got a job as a lifeguard at a sports centre, and part of that was, or part of the program that sports centre ran was coaching sessions. And it wasn't coaching sessions in the truest form that you and I would say. It was more parents would pay for their children to be looked after for a morning, and we would then deliver some sort of football or whatever sort of sport. So when I was 16, that was my first real experience of coaching. And then I've just really pursued it ever since. So when I was at college, when I was 16, I did sports, performance and excellence. Then when I went to university, I did coaching and development. And I've always, ever since that job, which I was only there for about 6 months, I've always had some form of coaching right up until this point. So with hockey, I'm not sure if you know this, but hockey's not, hockey is very much still an amateur sport. There is money in it, but not as much in this country, and definitely not as much outside of the London area. Probably a bit more than London, but very, very south. Not a lot going on north of the Midlands or the Midlands and above. So with that, to be able to be full time in hockey, you either need to be at a school that have employed you full time, or you need to do multiple different coaching in lots of different areas. And almost create a little bit off your own back by going into state schools and things like that that are going to pay a fee, I guess. So had to build it all up over a long period of time. My career hasn't always been focused on going down the route of that. When I finished university, I took on the local pub. I took the lease on of the pub.
Wow.
At 22 years old, I had a lease, and then 2 years later, I bought another pub. So two pubs at 24.
Goodness me.
Knocked that on the head a year later and went into car sales, just to sort of get some money behind me and get a more stable income coming. And then 4 years later, when it made the plunge to go full time. So that's a little bit of my career path. I would say my coaching, to be more specific with my coaching, I would say that I've always done player pathway, which in hockey is your county setup and your regional setup, that sort of thing. I've always done county level coaching and club level coaching. And then when I went full time, because you're available, opportunities just start to creep up. and present themselves to you almost, and you become a little bit in demand because there's not a great amount of people, like I said, outside of the South that are really doing it. So, yeah, I've picked up lots of different. Very grateful to have picked up lots of different opportunities, and I tried to repay that faith that they showed in me in their early days by almost remaining loyal to those projects. And I'm still at all 4 of the places that I first started with when I went full time.
Oh wow! Oh, that's brilliant. So in terms of that, just really quickly on this is a more self-indulgent sort of question. So I'm actually a primary school PE teacher. So I used to be a class teacher, but I'm now teaching PE. In terms of hockey, obviously, when you get to maybe secondary school, feels like there's a lot more of a pathway in that sense. But does that journey and the sort of the pathway to eventually playing, county and club hockey, etc., does that start in primary schools, or do you think there's still quite a bit of work to be sort of done there, or do you know what's your sort of perception of that? I suppose is what I mean.
Okay, so the pathway in hockey is it doesn't start until under 13s.
Right.
So the earliest age group that we have for pretty much for anything in the UK is under 13s. So you can play in that as an 11-year-old as well.
Oh, okay.
Now there are certain county setups that have children that are a little bit younger involved in that and sort of are preparing them for it, but it's certainly nothing to a monitored level of what football would be. So if I give you an example, if you're an under 13s coach at a county setup, typically the one single coach is normally running everything.
Right.
So there's not a great amount of people involved in it because hockey runs a lot of volunteers. And we're very fortunate that a lot of people do volunteer a lot of their time. But I guess one of the problems that we have as a sport is those people are few and far between, and they're very stretched. They're expected to do very big tasks. So if you're given a county, let's say Staffordshire, for example, if you're given Staffordshire under 15 boys, for example, you pretty much are the only person in that role, in that setup. You're in charge of reports, you're in charge of training, you're in charge of contacting parents, everything you can imagine, you're in charge of it. So there's lots that can be, but then there's other counties that have lots more people involved and that have managers and administrators and all sorts of different things. So I guess it really just depends on where you fall a little bit. But going back to the point of age groups, because you have so much to do, you can't really look at development plans for several years worth of players because you're already doing so much.
Yeah, of course. No, that makes a lot of sense. No, definitely.
So if you've got a squad of 24, you're only one person. You can only really manage that squad of 24. You can't really be looking too closely at what's going on in other age groups other than speaking to other coaches, I guess.
No, that makes a lot of sense. No, I appreciate you. Appreciate you taking the time to answer that. Cause that was, as I say, it was a bit more for sort of me and maybe my sort of practice as a teacher. But anyway, we'll get back to you, Stephen, because you're people want to hear from you and not me in this interview. So we're just going to talk a bit more about you as a sort of coach. And I know you said you obviously studied that coaching and things like that at university. So I suppose the sort of first question is really when you first took that step into coaching, whether it was like you say when you were 16 from the sort of leisure centre, or when you took it a bit more seriously. What were your sort of values then as a coach? So your philosophy, and has that changed to maybe sort of today, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I would say so. So I think when I was 16, I was probably too immature to really even consider what my philosophy and values were. I was very much still a player myself, very, very much still learning and going through a big learning journey myself as a player. So when I was coaching, it was really just trying to make players have loads and loads of fun. And I wouldn't say that's changed at all. I would probably just say the way that I deliver things has changed rather than the value of fun. So for me, when I was 16, I never forget a parent coming up to me and saying, "These kids are really connecting with you. Why do you think that is?" And I remember answering, and I said, "It's probably because the last people that have been here and working with them were 65, 70 years old, and I'm very close to their age in terms of an age gap. So it could just be that I've got a load of energy that I'm throwing at it, and they're responding off the energy, because I don't think my coaching as such is the reason they're loving it. I'd say it's more just the energy and the fun that the sessions have. I look back at all that now and I go, I am so embarrassed of the stuff that I was doing back then. I think any coach does that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, definitely.
So this experience when I was 16 to 18, really, I only ever coached football. I used to go into some schools, into some state schools for the Neaton Borough Football Club.
Okay, yeah.
And deliver some football there. So, yeah, that was great fun. That gave me a very quick in the deep end of coaching at primary school. So I just finished when I was 17, I just finished my level 2 football course, and I was going into primary schools trying to coach them what I'd learned on the level 2 football course. Right. So that was, in the end, the head coach came over to me and he said, Steve, actually, you need to not try to coach these kids as much, and you need to put them in a game situation and give them 1 or 2 subtle hints here and there, and then set up the game so that they learn from within. That was probably the biggest learning point that has stuck with me ever since, because what it taught me was context. It taught me context. So do you really need to be going in and trying to deliver a coaching session that's set up, that's suitable for all levels of football, when actually you're dealing with a group of 15 crazy 9-year-old kids?
It's difficult though, isn't it? I think, because especially in the early days of coaching, I think you do probably a bit more open to worrying about, it looks a bit messy, there's kids everywhere, there's cones on the floor, that kind of thing. And actually that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad session, and the kids, or even to a point when you coach adults, same sort of principle, it doesn't mean they haven't made progress, does it? I think but it's a hard lesson to learn, isn't it, that, I think?
Yeah, and actually I'm glad that I learned that lesson in the way that I did it, because it makes you stronger, if nothing else. It makes you stronger, even if you don't realize it at the time. Like I said, I look back now and I go, yeah, okay, I'm never going to make those mistakes.
Yeah, exactly. I know. I think that's brilliant. Just moving on then, Stephen, in terms of, you alluded to a bit of it already, but sort of what we normally also ask is, how do you sort of know as a coach, and that could be, for any one of the number of teams that you coach, but how do you know when you have delivered a high quality session? So, I think I've spoken to different coaches who've actually had quite a lot of different answers, but so it's just really to sort of gain your perception of how do you know that when a session's gone well, really?
I've never actually thought about what are the signs. So I guess the first thing that came to my mind then is when the players are not in a rush to go home.
Yes, yeah.
That is definitely that tells me that they've loved it and they will actually want to keep going. So with hockey, there's a few things that's probably worth noting in terms of barriers that stop us from doing what we can do. So we have to play on an AstroTurf, and if the club don't own their own AstroTurf, it's very, very strict on the timings that you have that you can go and play. There's also then the lighting issue as well. So I've been on an AstroTurf during a coaching session plenty of times, and the lights just go off halfway through the session because somebody got the timer wrong or something like that. So so with that, the lads kind of want to carry on and they want to talk about it and they're engaged, or even if they're just talking, they're not in a rush to go home when they're in the car park, because they're talking about what was going on. That tells me that they really enjoyed the session. I guess I'm quite fortunate that my groups of players, I'm talking adults here, by the way. I'm quite fortunate that my players are quite honest, and they will tell me it happens less often than often, but they will tell you if it's a bad session, and if you enjoy it.
If you don't mind me asking, just to jump in there really quickly, how do you take that? How do you react? Because when I first started coaching at sort of different levels, etc., at first I found it as a real slight on myself and would take it quite personally. And then I realised maybe over time that that's not obviously the best approach. But how do you sort of not cope, but how do you deal with that kind of situation with someone? And I do think it does progress us as coaches to maybe hear that, oh, that didn't work, that did work. But how do you sort of personally deal with that?
Yeah, so I used to go home and absolutely crucify myself as a coach.
Yeah.
And be like, I am awful. I don't know what I'm doing. And be really, really hard on myself. And then as I've matured as a coach, I look at it and I go, okay, well, there's something either in the session design or there's something in the way that I've explained something or just in the way that I've behaved that hasn't gone right. And if I can make sure that it's not me, it could just be that the players had an off night. Now, the other part of me says the players don't really have an off night. They're there for a reason collectively. If they've collectively not enjoyed it, it's probably one of those few things that I've just mentioned. So I actually just go back and reflect on it quite hard. And I've become quite skilled at being able to work out the moments that made a session go one way or the other. So if you can do that, I think you'll soon enough start turning sessions that are not so good and not having them very often.
No, I think that's fascinating. I think it feels like, I mean, in teaching as well as coaching, but, a lot of people use the word reflection. They talk about reflection. But actually, the way you've just spoken about it there, I think is, you've really got to engage with it. I think some people maybe view reflection as just, yeah, that was okay, or that wasn't okay, not a bad session, etc. But actually, the way you've spoken about it is you've really got to sort of chisel down, haven't you, into maybe the particular aspects of that, of why maybe that did work as well as it not working. I think that's really, so I really appreciate you being so honest about that, Stephen, in that sense.
Yeah, that's I think as well you can also, so typically I reflect probably more so when I feel a session hasn't gone too well, and then I won't tell the players that that's how I'm feeling, but I'll go home, I'll reflect on it, bang, 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 and then in the next day I'll drop a message on the WhatsApp group and say, guys, I had to think about this last night, and I don't think that I think this could have been better and that could be better. And by sharing your reflection with the players also gives you a different look on things, because often or not, players go, actually, I think you're completely wrong here. It was really good. Or they'll go, yeah, we agree. Can we try this next time? They'll actually give you ideas as well. So some of the best coaches for your coaching can be your players. Right.
Yeah, that's fascinating, actually. I've never really heard that approach before, of just, sharing that reflection with them. I know obviously players, depending on their egos, some are quite happy to offer opinions, aren't they? But it's particularly probably more so in football. But yeah, that's actually really fascinating. I learned a lot from that. I suppose it's a bit of a risk, isn't it? Because you can open yourself up a little bit and maybe be a bit vulnerable to that. But I suppose that's the resilience you need to be a coach as well, is being able to do that, I suppose, isn't it?
But I think that it comes back to the very famous saying of they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. But by allowing yourself to be that vulnerable, they see how much you care then, and then you can go, look, guys, you probably didn't think that I was thinking like this, but I really didn't think this was good and I want to correct it. If you can say that to your players, they're going to respond in a way, I think it's almost human nature within sport, that they're going to respond in a way that they're going to help you.
Yeah, I think, I completely, now you phrase it like that, actually, I completely understand what you mean. I think it's almost that buy-in from them, isn't it, as well? They're not just being sort of dragged along, they probably feel like they're contributing to the success of whatever you're doing as well, I suppose, in that sense.
Yeah, and it comes a lot down to culture, I guess, because you do that. If you knew you had loads of egomaniacs, you probably wouldn't open yourself up as much in there. I don't know, maybe you would, maybe you wouldn't, but I guess you've got to know your players, and you've got to know if it's safe to do it as well. Yeah,
sorry, one more question in terms of that, sort of on that sort of vein, is I sort of asked a lot of coaches this, in terms of negativity. Now, I know you've alluded to it in terms of maybe things that don't go well, but we sort of try and get a top tip from different coaches in different sports about how to maybe deal with a player, and it could be a youth player, it could be an adult, who is maybe reacting negatively to the session. And what I mean is not like, I didn't enjoy that, but, having a bit of a not refusing to do stuff, I suppose, but just not engaging in what you're trying to do and maybe being a bit of a hindrance to it. So how do you sort of react, and how do you deal with those kind of situations?
So I think the first thing that I do is, once I've identified it, is I'll pull them over or not pull that individual. Sorry, I'll stop the whole group, and then I'll explain the session again. Probably, if I can, a little bit more simpler, and just check that everybody understands it.
Right.
At that point, then I would, if we're still getting the same behaviours, I would then pull the player off and just have a chat and say, "Do you get it?" And that literally is the question: do you get it? And if they say yeah and they get it, then you can start digging in as a coach, because you kind of go, well, you get the practice then. So the practice, understanding the practice isn't the issue. So is it that you're not enjoying it? Is it that you're having an off day? Is it me? And just try and dive in as a coach to say, is everything all right? Just actually ask the player, is everything okay?
Yeah.
I think building that conversation is a good way of dealing with it, rather than going in and trying to get them to change their behaviors. Just try and understand what maybe they're going through, or maybe how they're interpreting something. And players will give you all sorts of different answers in this scenario. And it happens quite a lot if you spot it. So there's players that will go, well, I get the session, but I don't get the context in how we would apply this.
Yeah.
Or they could turn around and go, I've had a bad day, or whatever. And you start to build, you actually build a relationship there where you come away from the sport and you find out what the issue is with the person. You go for the person, not the player.
Yeah. No, I think that's really sort of really helpful and fascinating advice, actually, Stephen. I really appreciate you sort of opening up about that. So we're just going to sort of move on. We've got a few questions that are a bit more to do with the actual, maybe the technicalities of hockey and the similarities to football. So I'm glad you alluded to a couple of things that, so in my current sort of coaching situation is more grassroots sort of football, and some of the issues you were saying about hiring of pitches, especially come the winter time, that kind of thing. But what I want to sort of talk to you about is, I suppose, with the adult team particularly you're working with, which is my current sort of setting, how much time within an hour, or say, I mean, it's like, say an hour a week, how much time is sort of individual sort of skills-based coaching and how much is team-based? Because I find that if you're playing in part of a league with football, for example, trying to convince footballers to do the more basic fundamental skills at the beginning of a session can sometimes be quite a challenge, if that makes sense, to then build up to maybe the team parts of the session. So I just suppose, is it different in hockey really, in that sense?
I would say no. I would say, if I take last season, for example, on one of the men's teams that I worked with, I would say we spent 90% of our time doing game-based situations. So working on different scenarios, what ifs, what if this happens, what if that happens, rather than work. As we've come into the time that we're in, I've seen so much skill acquisition work happening by coaches, by players, by all sorts of different stuff, and it has changed the way that I'm thinking about my sessions. And I've spoken to the team about it, and they said, actually, this was really good actually from one of the captains of the teams. He said, if we were 25% more efficient in our basic skills, we would be 50% better on a pitch on a Saturday. That got me thinking, actually, if we were a little bit better at our basics, we'd be way better on a Saturday. So that said to me that we probably need to put some back in. So in an hour's session with the team that I'm working with at the minute, they would all land, if we only had an hour on the pitch, they would land at the pitch 15 minutes early and go for a warm-up. So the warm-up is done before we go on the pitch. Then we can get a full hour in. That way, it just cuts a little bit down on the time that we don't really need to almost waste by doing a warm-up on the pitch. So, because we can do that off the pitch. So within an hour, we would probably do 5 minutes technical work. And that would really just be the first time we knock a ball around. And I think that's quite typical in hockey, if I'm being honest. I think what a lot of coaches are steering away from now is, or going to certainly, given the times and what this has taught us all, a lot of coaches are going to go a bit more technical now, and they are going to go, do you know what? We probably do need to spend 20 minutes a session on it. So those lads in particular, they've said we definitely wouldn't mind 20 minutes of technical stuff. On the flip side to that, I went to observe a coach recently, quite a high level coach. And for the first 20 minutes, 25 minutes of the session, all he had them doing was just simply passing and then trapping the ball. Pass, trap, move, just getting all the basics in. a little bit of ball carrying and things like that. And he came over to me and he said, "What do you think?" And I went, "Sorry, this was a very talented group. So
Right.
This was a National League team.
Okay.
And he just had them doing these basics for the first 25 minutes. And I was like, I can't believe a National League team who should be able to do all these basics in their sleep are doing this in the middle of a training session. And this was mid-season as well. This wasn't in pre-season or whatever. This was mid-season. And he went, well, if we don't have these basics on the Saturday, we're not going to have anything. So we really need to focus on it. And then the other question I actually had for him was, he hasn't given many coaching tips. And he went, well, that's another problem. When you're technical coaching, a lot of coaches overspeak and they give too much technical information, and then the players become bored. So when I'm talking, I'll give them 10 minutes to go and practice. Then I'll say 30, 40 seconds worth of 2 or 3 points very, very quickly, and then get them back out there doing it again. And that way they're just going and they're focusing on those points, and there's no sort of blurred lines between it. So I guess that's an area in my own coaching that I'm going to look to develop a lot over the next season. So it'd be good to have a catch up in a year and I'll tell you
no,
how I did.
Absolutely. No, I think it's fascinating. I think it's, like you say, I suppose actually you've answered my next question, which was that obviously I think it's probably really important as coaches in our two sports particularly to work on that fundamental skills. But actually, how do you encourage, like you say, talented players to do that? But I think you just answered that in the way that you said that the less of us talking and the less we're sort of making ourselves centre stage almost. And the more the players are doing, the more likely they are to sort of stick with it, aren't they, I suppose, in that sense, and to sort of engage that really. But it is difficult. I think, particularly when you're working maybe a bit lower down the pyramid, it is a bit tougher to, when you've only got an hour and you're thinking, right, we've lost the last 3 games on the bounce, really, should I be still doing this sort of stuff? It's difficult, isn't it? I think it's not as straightforward as that, I suppose. The issue I find particularly, I don't know if it's the same with you, but with that whole hiring of pitches and stuff is actually you get the hour, but you're warming up off the pitch, then you've got to wait for the previous group to come off. Then you've got to quickly get, if you're using cones, get them dashed around everywhere wherever you need them. And it's a bit I always hate the first 5 minutes of a session because it's so chaotic. There's just stuff everywhere. There's people coming off the pitch. Do you know what I mean? That kind of thing. It is tough, isn't it? But they don't. You don't get that at Man City or whatever in the Premier League. But yeah, there you go. Just really quickly, Stephen, before we sort of go, we've got 3 or 4 questions left. That's it. And then, so in terms of the hockey sort of thing, one of the things that I love about watching hockey, on the TV and sort of games in my area is the short corner. And it's just something that's always fascinated me, really, because it's something I think they should definitely bring into football. Because I think it'd be brilliant if you had, a short corner in football. Just the chaos that would ensue from that, I think, is fantastic. But obviously, that's a set piece, and there is similarities in set pieces in football and hockey. But what I sort of want to touch on really is how much of a game in terms of outside of those set pieces is scripted, and how much is sort of down to the individual players. You've obviously played football yourself. You sort of have a strategy and a pattern and a plan, but you do have those individuals who can turn a game, that kind of thing. So, is hockey quite a scripted sort of sport, or are you relying very much on the individual players to try and work their way up the pitch, if that makes sense? Sorry, it's quite a long-winded question. I do apologise.
Yeah, okay. Just to be clear, is that scripted during the corners or scripted outside of the corners?
Sorry, outside of the corners. Sorry, yeah, I'll edit those bits out. Sorry. But what I mean is that outside of those set pieces, how much is sort of free down to the players and how much is, you and what you've done on the training pitch, if that makes sense?
I would say a lot of hockey coaches have moved over to principle-based coaching. So hardly any of it is the answer. I think the higher up you go, the more sort of pattern play you'd find. So when you get to international level, they will work on pattern after pattern after pattern. However, I think that's because it's not really until you get to, if you take the Premier League in England and then international level hockey, even Premier League, not quite, but they're the only full-time programs.
Right.
So with that, you've got to consider you're only going to see these people for 2 hours a week. Can you really afford to spend your 2 hours just churning out pattern after pattern after pattern? When actually you could use that time to make the players better make them make better decisions around the principles that you want to imply. So I think hockey's gone more down that route.
Yeah.
Rather than a set way.
No, that's fascinating. I really appreciate you saying that, because actually I think that's something that I probably didn't understand, but I think you've articulated very well, is actually that those time constraints. And I think actually it is, you know, I've tried this season a few times to try and thrash out those patterns, and it just hasn't worked. And I think it's for that following reason, like you were just saying. So, you know, I think I've learned a lot from that as well, actually. So I do appreciate you sort of saying that. So we're just going to finish off with 3 quick fire questions, Stephen, and then I'll let you have a cup of tea after your long sort of day of training and interviews and stuff. So just the first one is a negative question, but what would you say do you enjoy the least about coaching? So if you had to identify one thing.
The politics that come with it all. So there is, in hockey, like I said, because it's very much an amateur sport, nearly everybody involved in most hockey clubs are doing things on a voluntary basis, and a lot of the time you've got lots of people that have got disjointed ideas trying to do jobs in different areas, and the different politics that come with it off the pitch that affect your job is the bit that I really don't enjoy. So I'm not talking the politics of the players. I'm not talking about that he doesn't like him or she doesn't like that one or whatever. I'm talking about the stuff outside of, and away from all that. You get quite a...
No, I can only imagine what that's like. But I suppose I appreciate, especially if you're involved in as many teams as you are. I suppose that's then multiplied, isn't it? But so the next question is obviously the opposite of that. So I know it's very difficult because you coach so much and you do so much coaching. Sorry, but if you could pin down one thing, what is the most rewarding part of being a coach?
When the players feel that they've had success. I think that's probably why we all do it. Whether that's success in learning or success in winning, that's up to them. But the most rewarding part for me as a coach is when a player feels like and expresses success towards you almost, and they go and they share that success with you. So a player that runs off the pitch, and I had a player last year that scored a hat-trick in a cup game, and he ran off the pitch and picked me up because I'd spent an hour with him the day before working on a particular thing. And I was like, you're the one that's done it. But they're those moments I think that I love.
No, that's brilliant. Yeah, I think you can't, money can't sort of buy that, can you? You can't replace that feeling. And then the last one, Stephen, just to finish off the interview, and this is always a bit of a tough one, really. You get varying degrees of answers on this, is how do you think a player would describe you as a coach? So if I spoke to one of your players now, what would you think they would say about you?
Depends which player you go for. Probably, I would like to say caring. I think that would be the quality that I like to think my players feel from themselves. But
no, that's perfect.
Words, I imagine.
No. I think that's something just to finish off with, Stephen. I think that's something that we overlook, and I've spoken to different coaches, and I won't sort of name names, but where it can become a bit robotic, it can be a bit sort of technical, and it's about you just delivering a service. And actually, I think the way you've spoken, it sort of underpins everything we've spoken about. Is really, you were saying about that caring, showing them that you care, and just being sort of emotionally open and supporting them as well. So I think that's something that we probably undervalue as coaches in all manner of different sports. So I think that's a skill that I could learn a lot from in terms of that from what you were saying. So I really appreciate you giving up your time, Stephen. You've been a fantastic sport, and thank you for coming on and just sharing all of that information with us, really, and just being so honest. I really appreciate you doing that.
Anytime at all.
Just really, really quickly, Stephen, just if anyone wanted to sort of keep in contact with you in terms of your sort of professional stuff, like on Twitter and other places, where can people sort of follow you and find you?
Yeah, go on Twitter. I'm happy to give you my phone number anytime. If people send me a message or email address, I'll give all those to you as well, Charlie. So if they get in touch with you, honestly, give my details out as much as you want.
Okay, perfect.
Get them to get in touch, WhatsApp, whatever.
Cool. That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Stephen. Get yourself a cup of tea or whatever, because you've had a long day. So but yeah, I really appreciate you giving up your time and doing that. And we'll speak to you soon.
No problem. Cheers.
Cheers.